Hi everybody, welcome to Book Short. Today we're going to be talking about Warholic, or the sexual intellectual, or the most toxic work environment in history. So, this review is not going to be objective. Objective is more like a linguistic term than actually human actuation. But I have been re-examining a lot of my ideations about gender and the effects of gender on society and the role between the sexes. And this novel really just kind of helped me explore a lot of the questions that I had and what I was looking at and the different ideologies that go with it. And in some ways, and I want to be careful about this, from a more masculine perspective, only if we put feminist theory in a more feminist female perspective. And not to say that anyone is right or wrong, I just want to kind of throw that out there first. Now, just some quick funny stuff about this. I actually read the book without the cover because it kept getting in the way, so it looked like this, even more intimidating. And I was reading it at the coffee shop, and an older gentleman came up to me and asked me about what I was reading and whatnot. He saw, it was a big book with immensely small fonts. And at the end of it, he asked me if I was a college professor, which I'm not. I'm just a dumb YouTuber. Now, Warholic is just a brief overview. It's about ice stones and the titular character Laura Warholic, but it mainly focuses on ice stones focusing on Laura. Ice Stone being a very academically inclined man who works at a magazine company called Quink, and he uses Laura to write a bunch of articles to the effect of gender and the gender differences that he sees in society. And then it also goes into the Quink members, who are a bunch of terrible people, and it's more of a satire on modern day society. From Alexander Theroux being an 80-year-old man, he does a great job of really getting the culture of the early 2000s and all the discrepancies and idiosyncrasies that exist within it as well. And you don't really feel like, except for a few things, like some aspects of representation, it really doesn't feel like it's written by an 80-year-old man. Now, before we get into the meat of it, there is the aspect I want to cover that I can see this book getting a lot of criticism in the sense that it's very not PC. It gets really into the dregs of bad humor and also bad ideology. And what I mean by that is that you get a lot of sexist diatribes in this book. You get a lot of anti-Semitic diatribes, but you also get a lot of anti-white diatribes from black characters such as Harriet as well. A lot of poking fun and parody of lesbian and gay culture in this book as well, to the point where it would almost seem outdated nowadays. But the effect that he's getting at is to make fun of everybody. Nobody is off limits, and by insulting everybody, he's commenting on everything as well. And his major point is to bring out the stupidity, bring out the ridiculous nature of modern day society by showing the worst, almost stereotypes of these people. Nobody in the Quink office is a good person. And I think a great example of that is one character who just keeps saying so much anti-Semitic stuff throughout the novel, and to a point where I was actually kind of questioning Theroux to see. I was looking up stuff to see if he actually had some of these anti-Semitic ideologies. I don't remember all of them. There was so much, you just get bombarded with it. But then I remember oh yeah, the main character, that character's name in the book is Dick Snicker, meaning he's a dick and he snickers a lot of things. Thoreau is effectively saying that he's a troll, that this man, in some ways, even though he believes what he's saying, he's also saying it just to be an asshole. He's just picking at scabs. He aside from being anti-Semitic, he really has no grander view of the world or of himself outside of that. And then you can also see that within the effective relationship of his boss, I think it's Mr. Warholic, I forgot the first name, in that his boss is Jewish, and if he hates the Jews so much, why does he keep working for this guy? Why doesn't he get another job? He keeps working with a Jewish employee, and he keeps questioning his employee. A lot of the anti-Semitic diatribes are at his employee, who unfortunately is just a gross, slimy individual and fits a lot of the stereotypes. But you realize that Dick Snicker, he's just a dick who likes to snicker. He wouldn't be anything without being able to affect these racist diatribes at people. And then you just kind of realize, okay, maybe there was a slight problem with Phil giving it too much attention in a sense, but that's the effect that he's trying to get at, is that he's not a good person regardless of how much time he has to speak. And also, none of the characters in this book really get their comeuppance, except for one, which I won't spoil right now, even though he doesn't deserve it. And I think what Theroux's trying to get at in that sense is that, you know, these people exist. Bad people exist. People with dumb ideologies exist. Horrible anti-intellectual thinking is just out there. And these people aren't going to get their comeuppance. There's nothing in life that's going to change them differently. These people in the book are all middle-aged. They have their ideations, and it's not going to, like, who's going to call them out on it? Their work environment is so bad, so toxic. They all hate each other. That's not going to affect anything. They need to get paid. So they're going to work here because they wouldn't be able to work with at any other place, at any other magazine, because, you know, the boss is so skeevy. It allows them to be just as skeevy, if not less or more. It kind of reminds me of my friend one time who kept saying, like, yo, my neighbors are so loud, man. They're complaining all the time at night. And I was like, yo, why don't you put a noise complaint against them? And it's like, no, I kind of like it because we don't get noise complaints anymore. So they all work for Mr. Warholic because they can just be their bad selves and not have to, PC themselves or anything to that effect. So in terms of like all the nastiness and criticism in the book, it's directed at everybody, and Theroux is not doing it to be mean and spiteful, but more to point out aspects of all these different parts of culture, whether it be homosexual culture, Jewish culture, white culture, black culture. He's insulting it all to poke fun at everybody. Now, let's get into more of the meat of the story and the parts that really got me thinking and really got me questioning and kind of went in tandem with questions I've had this year as well about gender. And that's Eyestone's dissertations on gender through an early essay in the book. If there's any part you want to read about this book, I would highly recommend Eyestone's essay. It really encapsulates the gender differences on a more baseline universal level in a sense. Now, really quickly, I've been kind of reanalyzing like some theory I learned in college, like by Judith Butler, wherein that she posits that with language, the locutionary and the elocutionary meanings that we have behind language and words are always pressed upon gender, that we can't analyze the beginnings or abstractions of gender without language having those certain connotations. Because of our adherence to language, our ability to only rationalize through language, there are no actual differences between the genders because of that. And to be completely honest, I kind of see that as bullcocky now. I bought it more when I was in college. I think a big problem is that when we talk about essentialism, it's usually within the purview of white, old, racist men who used it to define minorities or blacks to a certain standard that they couldn't go beyond this intellectual standard, and that they were closer to the apes. Now, obviously, that's all bullcrap. That idea of essentialism, and it's just not intellectually sound and morally reprehensible. But unfortunately, I feel like sometimes we use that ideation to throw away a lot of arguments of essentialism. I think it's uncontroversial to say that there are differences between the genders. Fields outside of communication and linguistic theory have very much proved that, and we can see that just in basic analysis of sports science and like seeing how the top athletes perform. So if I was to put it on a graph, like here's Judith Butler, here's racist old white colonization man who wants to hold down the African Americans and black people. I used to be kind of right here with Butler, but in terms of my essentialist argument, I'd probably put myself more here. I wouldn't put myself like super far. I think what Butler, one thing that she says is very correct, is that through our language we do put those locutionary meanings on what gender should be through our culture mindset, and it's really difficult to get just a baseline understanding, because even if we were able to see the first forms of man, we would still have that natural inherent bias because we grew up with gender. In Eyestone's essay, he brings up a great point in that women are just more inherently important than men, based on the ability for them to give birth. And also, for them to be creative, they have to get rid of that biological imperative, because men have that natural drive to be creative, because what else do we have? We are, in a sense, infertile not able to create, so we try to supplement that through other means of the art. Well, women kind of have to get rid of that in order to be there, because what is a book compared to a child, to that actualization of extending the human race and the human culture. And that's what I would what I mean when I put my essentialist argument like more over here, a little bit away from Butler, in that if we want to keep this shindig going, if we want to continue for the human race to exist, we need to breed. We need to have women be pregnant. We don't have the science to go beyond that right now. Now, I want to be careful with universals, and that's not to say that keeping the human race is always a great thing at times. I think a great example of that is the Theroux tribe that Pynchon talks about a lot, in that they actually chose to stop reproducing because the genocide of their people and the enslavement of their people was so harsh. So we can totally codify instances where, not keeping the human race going might be, by some measure, a positive thing for that group of people. However, the universal I would just stick with right now is that we do need to reproduce and breed in order to keep it going. And I don't think that's too controversial. But even if we take Butler's argument and apply it to Eyestone's essay, is that we do put those positive illocutionary and locutionary meanings to reproduction, even in the realms of hunting, where we don't hunt, but don't kill female deer, don't kill female animals, because if you kill all the females, it's not going to be able to reproduce. And I think that aspect of Eyestone's essay is really important also, because we still, even in this a society where more liberal and feminist thought is existing, we still see the actuations of the biological imperative and the biological and we still see the biological privilege it gives women, and how it puts them at a bit more of an importance, in that there's a high rate of men birth, but a smaller population of men in society. As we see, most men are more capable of suicide, they are more likely to be homeless, they're more likely to be expendable in times of war. So we still hold a higher value to women just based off the biological essentialism, even in today's society. And if we look at it, for most of human history as well. Now, I kind of went off the rails a little bit there. Other parts of that Eystone brings up is that Theroux loves his list. This is, for all the postmodern literature I've read, where they just have list after list after list, Theroux is the most listiest of lists that ever listed. God, there's one portion where he goes on, he makes over 70 different points about sex and sexuality within culture. My friend Martel had a good point where he said earlier to me this year that we don't understand sex. And I was like, well, what do you mean? It's we really don't have a good definition. And what Eystone does and Theroux does in this book is that he just keeps bringing up questions. He doesn't necessarily answer them in all cases, but he just keeps bringing them up and bringing them up and bringing them up. How does deodorant affect the pheromones so that we're not able to find a genetic partner as compatible anymore? Lot's daughters, got Lot drunk. Does that mean that in the Bible that being infertile is worse than incest, in that they raped their father to get pregnant? And just a lot of different questions like that. And you just hit with so much of it. By the end of it, you're just kind of questioning yourself, what is sex? What is our real actual definition? We can almost have a legal definition, but even that is really vague if you really think about it. I think I mentioned it in my short Rumbling review, in that if you get a hand job and you tell your bros that you lost your virginity and they find out it's a hand job, they probably will say you're still a virgin. But if you did that to a minor, you're going to jail. So even different legal sentences like that, we don't have a good definition. Robert Bolano also talks about it in Savage Detectives, in that where his character is thinking about what constitutes as losing your virginity, and goes to say it's really confusing. And I would say that's the big part of Theroux in this book, is that just bombarding you with different questions, different scenarios, different ideations that will be against what the average person feels, such as the anti-Semitic remarks, as a means of not necessarily to convince you on a certain ideology, but to more bring your ideologies into question, and to bring it in such a concise, conclusive way that, yeah, by the end of it, you don't know the answers. You don't know what exactly it is, and it's not that Theroux doesn't take a stance in a lot of circumstances. He does also, but he's. I think the main point, and especially with Ice Stones, is that we don't know. And another point to further cement that is the fact that Ice Stones is lying to himself about his relationship with Laura in the book. He does love her. He comes to actualization twice in the book, and for somebody being such an intellectual, you know, you at first you think it's like, why is the book called "All the Sexual Intellectual"? Is referring to Ice Stones or is referring to Laura? To get back to that point later, then you start to realize that all the academic points that Ice Stone is making, all the great grand research he's doing, everything that he puts in front of you and that he posits himself, may be through a filter of egotism that he is not even aware of, and that he actually comes to realize later on in the book, and that is that his denial of loving Laura has shaped all his ideations and all his idea about sexuality in a dishonest and possibly negative way, to the point where it affects Ice Stones very much so. Later in the book, he just kind of has a breakdown about it, and then everything you've been listening to Ice Stones within the book, and everything that he sees in Laura, and everything that he sees within his colleagues, and everything about his own life, it's like, is this guy being selfish? Was all his theory, does it hold credence, or was it based off of an unrequited love that he couldn't accept within himself in regards to Laura? Even in regards to Rapunzel, a character that he fantasizes throughout the novel, but practically I don't think he ever talks to. I think that goes to like a male thing also, where that, why don't men always address their crushes? Why does, Dante have a Beatrice? And he talks about that later in the book really quickly as well, where, reality interrupts our dreams, and dreams, are something that we codify within ourselves. But that, men kind of keep that crush, so to sense, and they don't directly address it. The fear of addressing it is not so much the love that they can actuate from the woman, but the potential love, the ideal love, the imago of love that we place upon them. And, if you go up to confront them, and, if you get rejected by them, or, get into a relationship with them and see it's not that great, then we kind of lose that imago, that idea of love, that we lose the potential that was never really there to begin with. And sometimes that can keep us going. And I think to a large part that's what's happening with Ice Stones and Rapunzel. He doesn't want to address Rapunzel because if he didn't have Rapunzel, if he didn't have that beautiful ideation of love, he would only be within the harsh reality of Laura Warholic and all of her actual faults. Now, the book does, like, going back to the sexual intellectual part, is Ice Stones or Laura the sexual intellectual? A large case can be made for Ice Stones because he actually represents a lot of intellectual ideology, but funnily enough, he has a lot less sex in the book than Laura. And then you have to remember, who's the intellectual in a situation. For example, who would you rather learn baseball from? The baseball player who is, in the field, able to, who knows the sport of the game, who knows all the reactions that has to be done, or the kinesiologist who can break down the baseball player's body to such a fine level. It's that difference between academia, theory, and actuality, real life, and application. And, I think I said in my short rumbling review also, but Laura, she does not think about sex the way Ice Stone does. She just kind of falls into it. And, Laura is the baseball player. She's the one who's just going out there and doing it in a very harmful and destructive way, but it reminds you that a lot of sex happens in ignorance. If I'm not mistaken, when Foucault studies sex, when a lot of people study sex, they're not studying intellects. They're not studying the people who are, progenerating it or anything. They're studying the serfs. They're studying the common man, the people who don't think about sex and just go by their instinct, who are go by what the culture was told to do, but they're also the ones who are transgressing the culture as well. I remember my teacher talked about, when you have the church and you have all these different mediations and different ways that you're supposed to practice sex in a healthy way, and you have all these things that you do that you don't want to get in trouble for. Well, how do you not get in trouble for it when you're doing confessions? you lie to the priest. You do it anyway. You just don't say it to the church, and you codify it in your own mind in a way that you don't have to address that as well. It's not happening at the top echelons of academic. It's happening with the people who are not even thinking about it. And that's very much Laura in the book. She's having sex with everybody. And a lot of people that aren't good for her. But, in a sense, she's the baseball player. She's the one who it's happening in a, not saying baseball players are ignorant, but like she's the one where she's doing the practice while Isones is very much the theory, and you see the gap between the two of them. Now, also the relationship between Isones and Laura, I think is a very beautiful and touching, and one I've been learning so much example of the faults between both genders and how and what they can place importance on when looking for a partner. Um, let's start with Isones really quickly. I talked about it. His fault is that as men, men do not have that many options for mates as women do. You can see that on a lot of dating app statistics and whatnot. And that, there's that predilection to focusing on one person who may not be that good for us, who's not giving us the undue attention that is necessarily deserved, and almost romanticizing situations and, not coming to terms with how we feel about a certain person to the point where it can be detrimental to us. And that's happened to me plenty of times where it's like, why am I focusing on this person who's not good for me, who's not putting in that effort, who doesn't have that many qualities besides their sexuality to benefit me. It happens to a lot, it happens to women also, but we'll get to that. And so that's the dangers that men can go through, and it's really beautifully actualized through Ice Stone. And unfortunately, he's a man in his 40s or so, in his 30s or mid 30s, and I think he's in his 40s actually. And it just kind of shows like, yeah, high school never escapes us. Thoreau saying we're always going to deal with these problems. So even though you're in your 20s, they're not going to disappear. They keep going. Now Laura, there was when I was reading her, it reminded me of so many different women I met in my life, romantic or otherwise, in that she has the opposite side of the gender problem, in that she has so many potential partners out there, just because of, again, that biological imperative of being able to reproduce. But she has a fear of settling down, and also, she was married to the boss Warholic, and then they divorced, and, good, because he's an asshole, but they're both kind of assholes for each other. But she has that biological imperative of being able to reproduce, and she keeps choosing bad partners. She keeps choosing men who don't care about her, men who don't have anything going in their life, who are just washouts, who can barely, play a concert sober, just a bunch of damn idiots who work at record stores. But those are the men she keeps going for a certain form of validation, while clearly ignoring, the man who's, really good for her, and it would actually gives her the time of day and actually is very patient with her, that being Ice Stones. So Ice Stones not recognizing the feelings within himself, and Laura not being able to recognize the good partner within Ice Stones and himself, and just the contrast and all the conflict that creates within that dynamic as well. Other parts I want to touch on in the novel too, because there was so much to this novel. Like, this is like the definition of maximalist. I can imagine Theroux being an exhausting man to talk to, and then you find out his whole goddamn family writes books, so it's just one of those situations like, God, if I was at his dinner table, I would get demolished, because all these people are just gonna just drown me in trivia. But things I want to touch upon also is the sad relationship between Ice Stones and his Vietnamese girlfriend in the past, who passed away, and just the inability and the sadness to actuate on that love and to get past that love, and having something so pure and innocent and in a form they both care about each other just ripped asunder for you for just something as in some ways hardline and such a natural imperative that you can't get away with, but so trivial in the sense of disease. She got a specific disease that there was really no cure for her in her country, or probably even in America as well. And just based off of that fact, not being able to have that love, and how much that would have solved in Ice Stone's life, and how much happiness he would have been able to get from that. And it's just such a sad part of the book. And that even though Ice Stones has moved past that, and he's had other sexual escapades and love beyond that, it's never really escaped him, and it almost lives as a ghost. But I think the part that makes it sad is that it's not so much that he's crying over her, but how happy the memories are, and how those happy memories are never going to go away, but they're never going to come back as well. And how much that probably just affects Ice Stone into just getting into relationships later on in the novel as well. Other parts that are really great about the novel is Ice Stone's conversation about democracy and listing all the different academics and, you know, well-known figures like Karl Marx and whatnot, even I believe some presidents, and like I think John Locke was in it too, who don't agree with democracy and say like, hey, the problem with democracy is that you're gonna have a bunch of idiots voting who don't know anything, and yeah, like it's 2020. We got here for a reason, so you kind of read that and like, oh yeah, you know, oof. But another part of the book that I thought, this is really small, and I don't know how much attention I want to put on it, is that, you know, I don't know if this is like Theroux kind of poking fun at Ice Stones, but there's two organizations he believes in. One is PETA, which is funny, and then he even, I thought like, oh, maybe he actually believes in PETA, but then he has a part, it's like, I don't eat any meat, I have my PETA card on me, and it's like, oh my god, Ice Stones is one of those guys. But then he also mentions how, during the democracy section, how, you know, war is decided for us, and through one of the commissions is the Trilateral Commission, you know, the organization, when anybody brings up, you know, they're a right-wing idiot. And it kind of makes you, I wasn't sure if Theroux, especially with all the anti-Semitic comments he had throughout the book, which I know was made by Dick Snicker, but Ice Stone seems to be a lot more of a vehicle for him to express his ideology on the current culture, since he's the most sane and rational character and less egregious person in the book, and, you know, sees how horrible his partners at Quink are. But it's just kind of one of those things, like him mentioning it, does Theroux necessarily directly believe that, or is that just more of an actuation of Ice Stone and just like the nihilistic ideologies that he has, and just kind of showing that, hey, don't listen to everything this guy's saying, because he's wrong about a lot of things as well. I wasn't too sure. If somebody knows Theroux a lot more, please comment on that. It's a small portion of the book. I don't think it takes away from the larger narrative necessarily, but I think it does add a little something. This is going to be a slight spoiler. I kind of don't want to talk about it, but fuck it, we'll do it. So, at the end of the book, Ice Stone decides finally, and this is another part where, like, you realize that Ice Stone is not the sexual intellectual, because he goes to a strip club on Christmas Eve with his workmates, and, like, he has a mental breakdown. And mind you, I've never been to a strip club because I'm not 50 years old and divorced. But it's like, if I did go to a strip club and somebody went blind and started mentally comparing all this stuff and the actuations of the strip club to hell, I'm like, dude, calm down. You're just here to see some titty. What are you doing? And, you know, have a huge, just like, what is love? Why am I treating Laura this way? How do I feel about Rapunzel? What is the nature of forgiveness? Should I forgive both parties? It's like, dude, you're thinking way too much about this in a sense. And I feel like that's Theroux really poking fun at Ice Stones as well, and that, like, hey, he's not the sexual intellectual you think he is, because he's freaking out at a strip club, having an existential crisis over one attractive girl there. But the sad part of that is because he bought some Christmas presents for Laura, and he decides, it's like, I'm going to go back to her, because he leaves her twice in the novel, because they just argue all the time. Laura just not a good person and just cannot take any criticism or self-responsibility for herself. But Ice Stone decides, like, you know, I still love her, I'm going to go to her. And he's wearing a jacket that he bought from, accidentally, that Laura stole the jacket from her ex-boyfriend, that he was a total douchebag, gave it to somebody else, and that guy sold to Ice Stone, unaware that Laura stole it, and thinking it's a band that she likes, he's going to give it back to her. But in that, she's on a date with another guy who's very paranoid, and he shoots Ice Stone in cold blood, thinking that it's the other guy, Jeff. And at that point, Ice Stone is gone. That he's the only character that gets like some sort of comeuppance, and it's totally undeserved. And it's like, wow, 800 pages for this. But, like, you know, it's a really beautiful and effectual part of the novel, because then Laura, being 36, realizes that she has nobody. She's alone. There's nobody else for her to go to. She's gonna be sued by her ex-husband. All the men in her life think she's trash and just a whole person. Funny, the most insulting insult in the whole book I feel like is actually from the lesbian bar where a lesbian tells Laura, like, it's been a while since you had to be interesting. So by and large, I would say definitely read Laura Warholic. Alexander Theroux is such an intellectual, and you'll get so much out of this book. And any questions you might have about gender, or presuppositions that you have about it, or you want to question yourself about it, I said that word horribly. This book will definitely challenge you on that. It might not provide the answers on all the questions it lists, but I don't think there's any one person or source that really could. So definitely check it out. It's totally worth it. And I have COVID, so be safe out there.